Hello, Dimitri. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm at Cassava House in my
Again,
corner booth
in your
again
corner booth, your
in
office.
East Harlem. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk today about your meeting that you had last night with the disintegration group. And the overall theme was, how do you find the right medicine for you? Is that correct?
Yeah. Um, so we had a lot of regulars. So there was a new person in, a woman in her late 60s. And there were a few people in their late 60s who had sort of lived the 60s but hadn't got high in the 60s somehow. This is a trick I don't understand. I mean, but they did it. And, with all the publicity around psychedelics that's coming up right now, they were looking to explore. So, this woman came in, and we were all sort of sharing about our different experiences around the room. And she asked the question, she had never heard of Bufo 5-MeO. She had never heard of ketamine, for example. And then there was talk of ayahuasca and San Pedro and Iboga and LSD and MDMA. And the question is, how do you know what to do? And it's kind of like a simple but complex, simple answer, but not so simply done. Well, let me say this. If you're looking to detox from opioids, for example, I think the thing you want to probably be doing if you're looking to do a psychedelic is Ibogaine, right? Ibogaine, there's a sort of a tit for tat, right? You do Ibogaine, and it's kind of known to address the physical withdrawal. But there's not anything, at least that I'm aware of, that any of these other drugs, medicines have sort of consistent track record of addressing physical symptoms, for example, right? I mean, someone yesterday shared that there was an MD that they knew that was using psilocybin to microdose to help his hearing. And I've heard of people using other medicines for Lyme's disease, but nothing so consistently as Ibogaine addressing the physical withdrawal aspect. So if you're coming in like this woman, and she's sort of in her late 60s, she's always had this feeling that she wasn't living to her purpose and had dealt with some depression. And some other people around the table had dealt with sort of crippling depression. The question was like, what, how do you do it? I mean, how do you do it? How do you go about finding the right medicine? So the first thing is really like you start to ask around. Well, there's a couple things. The right one for you, the right source for you, and if you're doing it with someone else, the right container, the right person. And I guess the thing that we came up with is you start to go around and ask around and look for people you trust and vibe with to help to guide you, and people with experience. I mean, sometimes that's sort of dubious too, because there are people at different stages of the process, like people who have, 2 years into it, a year into it, and their whole life has changed, or they tried this one thing and it didn't work at all. Those are really individual. I had this sort of presence, by the way, at the end of at the talk, our meeting. There were, I think, 15 people in the room, and all of them were fairly new at it. All of them were under 4 years of sort of a psychedelic emergence, emerging in and emerging from, I guess. And like, I had to give the perspective of 17 years out, which is much different than someone who's like, my depression completely ended after working with ayahuasca for a year, or my depression hasn't budged at all after doing 4 sessions with MDMA and a really qualified therapist, a sitter. But that's something we'll get to later. So here's what we came to. There's no way of knowing. So the reason that shrinks, I probably said this before in our little talks, the reason that psychiatrists and psychopharmacologists love this shit is because it gives them something else in their tool bag. And their tool bag consists of tools in the form of medications that they don't know how they work, that they can make all kinds of claims about. They don't know why it works or if it'll work for you. And they have developed an entire industry and practice of becoming very comfortable about giving people these drugs with some sort of authority. So folks who have sort of navigated, the psychiatric pharmacopoeia are familiar with that. A doctor will meet you for 15 minutes, depression, he'll give you something, say, come back in 4 months, see how it works. Up your dose, lower your dose. Now, the good thing about it, and so using that same sort of ethos, that's what you kind of got to do with these drugs. And the other thing is they work with the sort of classic allopathic psych drugs. Sometimes they work for a while and then don't work, right? And then you got to switch it up. So I think it's the same thing. It's just the trial and error. Now, on the one hand, it's far lower threshold because you can go do an ayahuasca session and you're not going to become dependent on like you would on an SSRI, or if you start to do microdosing, it's not going to be a dependency issue. On the other hand, it's far higher threshold because you got to go trip on ayahuasca to see if it's for you, and maybe 4 or 5 times, and go into that sort of death realm or whatever happens. But I think that there is no prescriptive way of doing this, and I think again that's good. That's at odds with the research which is done to necessitate FDA approval. This is real nuanced shit. And the only way to do it is to sort of go and investigate. Now, the thing to always keep in mind is you don't want to go in and do something that's going to be damaging for you. So if you've got a diagnosis of schizophrenia, don't mess with any of these things. If you're on SSRIs, you need to know about getting off them and have a real serious look at whether that's worth it, because it can be pretty hellish to get off of those things. If you have some sort of pre-existing condition, physical condition, for example, with ibogaine, you don't want to do that either. But outside of all of that, the only way to do it is to sort of go in and see what's right for you. That was the other thing that came up. These prescriptive ways of giving these drugs to people are often ineffective and unfortunately damaging. There was somebody who came from arrhythmia, and I've heard this before, and what she was counseled was to drink, don't think, meaning drink the ayahuasca and not think about the amounts, just keep drinking it. Any place that tells you not to think in terms and not in sort of a meditative way, but as a way of sort of dictating the way your healing should go, should be really held in suspicion and it is suspect. So basically, do away with your own agency. And look, a lot of us have gotten to a point where like our agency has led us to some really fucked up places. But I think what you want to do in creating containers for folks is to empower that innate wisdom that is somewhere inside of you, your own healer. So the only way to do it is trial and error, with a lot of discretion and being very careful along the way and being gentle on yourself. And
Okay.
yeah,
So,
and following that inner wisdom.
So you mentioned the three things: the right medicine, the right source, and the right person. Okay.
Yeah.
So you just said, trial and error for the right medicine. Any advice on source and person?
It's always the same thing. You gotta really decide whether you trust someone or not. So like someone like me who came up through heroin and drug, I got like a sense of like if I'm looking for a source, but you got to look at like intention of everybody. Is it someone that's just selling drugs, which is fine. I have nothing against drugs. People who sell drugs. I hate the word drug dealer because it's so judgmental. I like drug worker. If someone's a drug worker, like a sex worker, and you just got to see if you trust them and if they know other people, and talk to other people who have been to that source and scope out what their experience is, and that's the only way. I guess there's stuff online where you can get drugs, and I guess there's the rating systems. I've never done that, but be careful.
Any red flags?
People make outrageous claims.
What
someone's going to tell you
constitutes an outrageous claim?
That if you listen to Mother Ayahuasca, you'll be healed of your childhood trauma. You won't be, I don't know, dyslexic, bow-legged, fucking nearsighted, bucktooth.
So is
anything
it the
that
old?
tells you that you won't have those things?
Is it the old? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Anything specific happened in the meeting last night that you want to talk about?
I think that the overall arching thing just comes back to like this is all biology and biography, and it was just another really moving meeting where people really shared openly and beautifully, and information and energy was exchanged.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, that sounds like another great session.
It was.
So before we wrap this up, anything else you want to add?
No. Come next week. Come and join us. You have the address. It's on the website. You can book a spot beforehand if that suits you. But yeah, come check it out.
You could book the spot right there on the website. Just follow the link.
And the address is?
I got it here. It's every Tuesday night at 7 p.m., 116 West 23rd Street on the 5th floor. Cost is $30 for each 90-minute session. And like I said earlier, you can go directly to the website, reserve your spot. You accept walk-ins, so if they walk in, there's room they can sit down. But if they want a guaranteed spot, book it online. Pay for it online.
Right on. All right.
All right, Dimitri.
Thanks, bro. Thank you.
Welcome. And I'll talk to you next week.